It's 4:30 p.m., so I will call to order the May 13th, 2020 MISD Board of Trustees meeting to order. It's a budget workshop. This meeting is taking place virtually pursuant to Governor Abbott's temporary suspension of open meeting laws issued on March 16, 2020, or 2020. The time is 4:30 p.m. Agenda item number 1 is public comment, and I'm informed that we have not had anyone sign up for public comment.
Correct.
So we'll move to agenda item number 2, the budget workshop. And Mr. Dodge, you have the floor.
Thanks, sir. Good afternoon, Board President, Mr. Davis, Board of Trustees, and Superintendent, Mr. Riddick. My name is Darrell Dodds, Chief Financial Officer, and I will be presenting the budget workshop for the 2020-2021 budget planning year. Assisting in the presentation is Woodrow Bailey, Chief of Human Capital Management, Carla Martin, Executive Director of Financial Services, and Tony Kingman, Director of Budget, who will be guiding the presentation today. This will be the agenda that we'll be following this afternoon. It goes from our planning calendar all the way down to our 2021 proposed superintendent and board priorities. As you see here, these are the things that have happened so far and the things that will happen in the coming month. We are, as you know, all the board actions are in June to adopt the budget, and then in August to adopt the tax rate to fund the budget. This is the 2019-20 budget highlights. The original budget began July 1st and has been amended to where the budget currently stands. We have projected the revenue and expenditures to the end of the fiscal year ending June 30th, with the total revenues projected at $408.5 million. The largest part of those revenues are the ad valorem taxes. At the end of April, the current tax collection rate was at 97.5%. The projected expenditures ending June 30th are expected to be $351.4 million, leaving $57.1 million available for fund balance. These were the 19-20 superintendent and board priorities that was approved when the budget was approved, and they are listed in A through J. As indicated, all of these were accomplished so far in this budget year. And then as we move through the budget year, the board approved additional priorities, K through Q, that have also been included in this current budget. We did add R and S. The server room chiller has been added due to the age of the server or the chiller and the problems that the current chiller is having. I believe the chiller is around 16 years old and the warranty went out about 6 years ago. And then also, if we look at S, if there's any additional retention incentives that for all staff that the board would like to do, we can certainly take a look at that.
And those retention payments that we're looking at on letter S, that's on top of what we do currently for our non-professional staff, which is the $1,000 that we do. So this would go to provide all staff with $1,000. So we would add another $1,000 to those non-professionals, and all other staff would get $1,000.
Mr. Riddick, I do have a question,
Yes, sir.
if I may. Do we have a preventive maintenance set up for those chillers? I know it seems like it's a last minute deal when we have some of those things break down or fall apart on us. And just like this one, it's gone 6 years past the warranties on it. So is there anything in place in the future that we may have a preventive maintenance program in place for these chillers?
So we have a plan that speaks to the age of what those chillers look like across the building. So this is not a chiller that cools an entire building. This specific one is in a server room that keeps the room cool as those servers start to heat up, that provide the technology logistics that push out. And so this one is dated 16, I believe 16 to 20 years old. I know Mr. Dodds had said 16, could be up high as 20 years old, what I've heard last in another meeting. And so that's to do this one. So we know the life cycle of what that looks like, but we've not until within the last 2 years started thinking through the strategy of the preventative maintenance piece. We've been building this on as chillers have gone down. What does that look like to replace as it goes down? But we've been working more productively around how do we replace before the life cycle of something or when it is in time for the life cycle for that replacement. So we talked with the team about building that strategy ongoing. We'll have an assessment that was built in on letter P, which shows a district-wide assessment. We're going to ask that we have someone who can come in and give us the entire life cycles of everything within our building and in all of our facilities so we can create a better plan as not just doing triage when things go down that have that, but how can we build into the cycle what it looks like. And so for the last 2 years, we've been able to tackle at this time frame what it looks like to take care of any preventative maintenance elements, and that's what you're seeing right here.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
All right. I believe there was a question in the RO for the RO system for the elementary. That also in the 2021 superintendent priorities, we have included the secondary.
Correct. So you'll see in the 2021 priorities, you'll see several other items that will come through. We'll let Mr. Dodds go through the agenda. And so these are 1920, and the last one is the retention, which we'd like to take care of at the end of the year, which we have the ability to make that happen. And so all these we would have accomplished before the July timeframe. If anything does carry over for whatever that reason might be, we would designate those funds to take care of those in the 2021 budget year, but not utilizing any of the 2021 funding. In the 2021 priorities, you'll see another list of what we want to accomplish and move forward. And you'll see, like Mr. Dodds shared, which is the RO system for the secondary schools that we would want to move forward and address. We were looking at seeing if we could get those done in this school year. The time frame looks like it's going to be really tight to make that happen. So we wanted to go ahead and keep it on the 2021 priorities list.
Yes, sir. Okay, Tony. One of the impacts that COVID-19 has had is on the calculation of the average daily attendance. And that has come out to where we would take the first 4 or 6 weeks of this current year, look at including last year, what the first 4 or 6 weeks looked like, average those together, and then that's where we come up with our final average daily attendance for this current year. For 2021, I know we all want to be back in the classroom and attending school activities, but we'll keep you updated as we move along in this situation and let you know how we'll be handling the average daily attendance. One of the things that Midland ISD has done over the last couple of years has received a superior rating on the first report. That's something we continue to strive to continue that accountability status. One of the indicators on the first report, it requires the board to discuss property values and the funding lag within 120 days of adopting the budget. We will discuss property values throughout the presentation and what it means for the district. The funding lag is when the state is using property values from the past year and the district is collecting on current year values. When the current year values are up, the district would receive additional state funding. If the current years went down, the district would receive less state funding because the state was using higher values for previous years. Of course, House Bill 3 removed the funding lag for 1920 and for this time forward because now they are using current year values along with what the district is using current year values. But this is still an indicator on the first report, and we need to be able to check yes that we discussed the funding lag. As we look at property values, you'll notice just a slight decrease in what we're looking for 2021. This was the estimated certified values that we received April 30th. And we'll use those through our calculations in our budget scenario. As we look at the property value trend, this graph shows that the April estimated values in blue compared to the July certified values in yellow. You can tell that over the past few years, there's been quite a bit of change from April to July, which has an effect on how we are working our budget. And then each year in the red line, each year they recertify in October, and that's where that red line goes through. And sometimes it's right on the mark, and sometimes it's still off the mark on what was certified in July. As we look at the district's fund balance charts beginning from school year 13-14, which was the first year the district became a recapture district, to the current estimated fund balance. Several events has helped increase the fund balance, including the change of fiscal year to June 30th in 17-18, and to 48% increase in property values and House Bill 3 in the 19-20 school year. The estimated fund balance that we're estimating at the end of this year would be up to $158.2 million, which is 45% of the current year budget expenditures.
Mr. Dodson,
Yes.
Brian Murray, could you give us your thoughts on what that percentage should be for you to feel comfortable for us to roll into the new fiscal year?
Well, as a finance person, I always want to have that savings plan for the district in case we do have problems. We are looking into some procedures and probably variances as far as what we want our fund balance to stay at. We haven't quite developed those yet, but this is roughly around 4.5 months worth of funding for the district. And so, you're required at least 3 months. And if you look at it that way, it's not that much further than what you're required to have. But I think once you start reaching that 5-6 month mark, you need to start looking at flattening that out.
Okay, thank you. And do you see this as being beneficial? I know that seems like it's a big jump, but And we're looking at 2020, 21 valuations, but probably the next year is when we're going to see a fall off in that, where that fund balance, that healthy fund balance, is really going to help us for the prior year or the following year budget.
Yes, sir. You know, we've looked at funding throughout the next 3 or 4 years, projecting what values are going to do. We don't know. We know that, or we think that they will take a dive in 21, 22. And so that fund balance may have to be used to make up part of that year. Hopefully by the next year, it'll start leveling out. But we will, having that there will help us carry us through when those values do drop.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Dodds, this is Rick.
Yes, sir.
I don't know if you're going to cover my question in future slides or not, but my question goes back to the one that I typically ask during these meetings, and that is the uncertainty that exists as to whether or not we're in compliance with House Bill 3 in the amount of monies that we've used for compensating our teachers. Or has the dust settled on that question? Are we in compliance, or is there still some uncertainty?
You know, I've talked to TEA several times on this subject, and this is my opinion, and they're what they tell you is, as long as the district has made a good faith effort in complying with the legislative law, then they will be fine. I think when this budget was built in June of last year, and they had I believe the governor signed House Bill 3 on June 16th or something like that. They didn't give you a lot of time to figure out what you're fixing to do on salary, how to calculate that 30%. And so, you know, TRS won't let you change in the year and backdate those salaries, because they will let you, but they just don't give that teacher credit. So in my conversations with TEA, they understand what happened in last year in setting these budgets, especially for districts that are July 1, June 30th year. But as long, and we're looking in the superintendent priorities, we're looking at increasing those teacher salaries. That brings us right at that 30% mark, and also auxiliary staff salaries. And my conversation is them, as long as we are continuing to try to make that point, then we'll be fine.
Are you referencing the 2021 budget for those last remarks?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
This bar graph shows the history of the tax rates here at Midland ISD from 2011, which was at $1.14.1, to the estimated tax rate that we're going to be looking at in 2021 of $1.364, which is also a decrease from the current year, where we were at 97 cents for M&O and 8 cents for INS. In House Bill 3, property tax compression is what they were trying to achieve. The 2019 2020 tax rate was compressed from $1 to 93 cents, and was allowed to add tax 4 pennies, the 4 golden pennies, back to the total tax rate for a 97-cent total rate for M&O. With state compression for 2021, the estimated Tier 1 tax rate is 91.64, and you add back the 4 golden pennies to bring you to 95.64. This year is a little different. as we go through our values, and once we get our certified values, that will be sent to TEA. And once they get those values, then they will actually set the maximum tier 1 rate that the district will use. So as our values, estimated values that we showed earlier was not over a 4% increase, then we estimate that our actual tier 1 rate will be 91.64 with the availability of adding those 4 golden pennies.
Mr. Dodge, do we have to do anything to get those 4 golden pennies? Are they automatic now?
They're automatic. Essentially, you can add those in whichever school district in the state does that. There is the possibility of adding 1 more golden penny this current year with a unanimous vote of the board. But and looking at that, about what that does for Midland ISD is shift the funding from the state up to the taxpayer. So it doesn't bring us any more funding. And that is also in statute that penny can be added in future years without a unanimous vote of the board at that time.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Uh-huh. As you know, I talked about it before. We began recapture payments to the state in 2013-14. The school year, nearly $15 million was, and then to an estimated high of 1920 of 133.4 million. The estimate for the new school year is 122.1 million. Which would bring the total recapture to the state at right at half a billion dollars over those years. Go ahead, Tony. I thought you'd like to look at what the top contributors to recapture was for 1920. As you can see, we are in the top 5. Austin ISD, Plano, Pecos, and then Midland. And then you have Highland Park, Eanes, Wink Loving, Carrizo Springs, Cotulla, and Karn City ISD in the front, round out the top 10.
Now, the recapture, though, looks back at last year's property valuation, right? Or when they redid it, did they do both for the WADA and the recapture's current year?
In prior years, up to 18-19, yes, that's how it was figured. Now in 1920, it is built off excess revenue, and so it weighs heavily on your student population to your values. And so as if student population falls and values go up, then that would cause the district to pay more in recapture. But it also depends on total taxes collected and what you're budgeting. So as you'll see in some of the scenarios, we do have a drop in scenario 2, even though we have a decrease in student population or what we're estimating, but that's because would be receiving less tax revenue.
Thank you.
The average daily attendance over the years since 13-14 has grown from 21,000. Yes.
I'm sorry. What was the example 2 on the previous slide, or scenario 2?
I'll get to that here in a minute. I haven't got that. Okay. Sorry, I jumped ahead when I was talking. I apologize.
Nope, it's all right.
We've grown from 21,619 to 1920 average daily attendance of 24,233. And we are estimating, and I'm getting into my scenarios again, 23,990 as a 1% decrease from this current year. And this is what you were wanting to see, is what budget assumptions that we're looking at. In the 2021 budget scenarios, I've covered most of the criteria in the previous slide, but putting them side by side in this slide. Scenario 1 is using the April 30 property value estimate with the same collection rate that we are budgeted under currently and the current average daily attendance. Scenario 2 is using the same property value estimate, but decreasing the collection rate to 95% and decreasing the student average daily attendance to 1%. So as we get into the budget scenarios, scenario 1, we compared the projected end of year budget to the estimated budget for 2021. You'll see the ad valorem taxes decreased. That's due to the lower tax rate. Also, we decreased the other revenue, which mainly consists of interest. The state revenue increases, and due to the additional funding for the lower tax rate, and also the available school fund increases, the formula increases from 259 to 400 for ADA. So that's why you're seeing a big increase in the state revenue for that. Currently in the expenditures estimate, increasing 58 million dollars, and from the 1920 end of year projected estimate. Both of these scenarios have included the 2021 superintendent board priorities. We just wanted to see, if you want to do all those priorities, what it would actually do to our total budget. In scenario 2, the scenario 2 uses the same certified estimate with a lower tax rate collection and a 1% decrease in student population. This lowers the collection, tax collection by 21.5 million, and the same for other local revenue that we had in scenario 1. The expenditures are the same in scenario 1, but it also, the big change there is our recapture lowers by about 11.3 million. I know that's a lot of information to look at. If you want to take a second or two to look at it, you can.
I put a question in the chat earlier about I'm sorry, it's John Trischetti, about the elementary RO systems after all that from this spring. I saw that it was elementary, but I didn't see secondary. Are we staggering that out? Is that something separate that I just didn't see on a slide?
We're right, next slide has that on there. So anyway.
Sorry.
No, you're fine. You're fine. That's when you're going through virtual, you don't get to see all the slides as you're going through it. So anyway, but yes, if there's no question on the 2 budget scenarios, we can move on to the next slide, which is the 2021 superintendent and board priorities.
Okay, Mr. Dodge, can I ask you one question before we move on?
Okay.
So the projected end of year budget, that's actually the budgeted amount that we're out on for this current year that we're going to end the year with?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that's what we're projecting if we go through you know, with all of our salaries and everything else. And we've also included what the additional superintendent and board priorities were in those estimates.
Okay, so basically you're projecting 57 million excess for this budget?
Yes, for 1920. Scenario 2, you're looking at 12 million.
I'm just thinking, have we identified anything maintenance wise that we need to take care of in this current year? And I know you said, or Mr. Riddick said, that we couldn't address the RO in this year, couldn't have it done fast enough. Is that why we can't proceed with some other items of maintenance, because we just don't have time to get them budgeted in this year, or get them planned in this year, not budgeted?
But for a lot of it, by the time we go out for bid and different things like that, it would probably push us into next year. And I think that, you know, that's something as we develop a plan for fund balance that, you know, we may want to go ahead and commit or assign some of the fund balance to some things that may come up even in when we do the facility assessment, that we may be able to use some of that fund balance that we're putting in this year for that.
And Mr. Murray, as well, based on when we did our department budgets, school plant services being one that you're speaking to right now, we looked at what they had still available in their budget that they had not spent up to date. And we then turned around and went after what you're speaking to, the maintenance projects and things that they requested, whether it be equipment or items that they wanted to take care of within buildings that they felt these were the things that they wanted to attack. So we had estimated about almost $1 million that were in there that we wanted to redirect that they could take care of in their current budget, and it not still be an ad that we had to look at, that they were driving towards. Then we looked at what Mr. Dodd spoke to is what are things that are larger, and Mr. Bishop speaks to that as well, on the preventative maintenance side, that we need to go out and do work to go knock out. And we said, well, we have a facility assessment that's going to really help drive what that looks like. And then let's look at what that facility assessment does for us. Then we can begin to capitalize on some of those things. You'll see in the priorities, when we get into capital improvement, you'll see things that were bond related that we want to bring back in and begin to tackle. Some of the large preventative maintenance things that we talked through, which are Mr. Bishop mentioned one, which is chillers and roofs. Those are our largest pieces in regards to preventative maintenance that we've got to drive towards. You see one roof repair that we spoke to previously. We did take care of this past year 3 of our most egregious chillers. We went and took care of, I believe the number was 3, for certain 2 at Abel and I can't recall the other campus right now, but certainly took care of those 2 items this year before this past summer. So we were able to do them in the last budget year and then accomplish those things in the summertime. So we are knocking out what that looks like. But those are our 2 big preventative maintenance items, but we did address that strategy going into the budget review as they were developing their 2021 budget to think through. And that's why you see us now beginning to attack what that looks like through departments and their needs.
Okay, great. That's very good. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
And one other question that as I'm kind of looking through this, salaries and benefits, I'm assuming that's all employees. And do we keep, under scenario 2, do we keep the same salaries that we would in salary 1 if we've got less students, or how do we consider that?
At this point, yes, those salaries are budgeted at the same from all the expenditures except recapture are the same in scenario 1 and scenario 2.
Okay. And I know probably jumping ahead too, but this salaries and benefits number going up by approximately 32 million, that includes a projected raise for our staff for next year.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome. There's no other questions. Tony, you want to go on to the superintendent and board priorities for 2021? And we'll pause here and let you look at those. If you have any questions, we'll be certainly glad to answer them.
So are those in the expenditures that we saw on the last slide, all of these items?
Yes, they are. They are in there. That's one of the reasons that the department budgets increased so much is that, and some of the salary increases, we wanted to see what it would do to us with our estimated revenue and our expenditures if we just went ahead and included every one of these priorities.
Okay, thank you.
And several of those we spoke to and addressed earlier in regards to things that we want to continue. So A through J, there's not been anything that we haven't brought up. Numbers are pretty much everything that we referenced there. If there was a to be determined, we've now closed out what that item looks like. On K and L and what could potentially be an M, those are the items that we're looking at, and we'll take you to the next page in just a moment and share with you what are the items that we're thinking about through capital improvements. And then we added L, which are COVID-19 expenses. We don't know what that looks like, but we know that there are going to be some things that we're going to tackle on top of that. Food service being an example. We know that TDA is going to cover a number of things, but there are going to be some things that TDA, Texas Department of Agriculture, TDA is not going to cover. As an example, that we would have to take our general budget to support that particular department. We know that we're buying more protective equipment. We know that we bought more hand sanitizer, more soap, things that we're actually trying to get ourselves launched towards for re-entry, that we know that we're gonna have to purchase more things. So there'll be some funding that could help support what that looks like, but we know that there's gonna be some items that are gonna carry themselves over, whether it be premium pay. Now that we have it in our policy, we will be good for any other future item that comes up. But going backwards, we know that that's gonna be an item that we're gonna need to cover. So we know that there's going to be some anomaly of things, and that's what that item is there to address.
This is John Kennedy. Based on the last 60 days, what's happened to the community as far as the oil business, I'm really concerned about increase in pay across the board now. I'm conflicted in the fact that I know they deserve it, but we're talking about a community that's, basically being shut down or highly curtailed, and we're talking about raising teachers' pay. I know that sounds somewhat insensitive, but I think we need to at least think about that.
And I would tell you, Mr. Kennedy, that's something that we did wrestle with for a little bit around, teacher pay during a time when there's a downturn. One of the things that we do need to do, though, I would share, is capitalize on the opportunity to address it while we can, and it works within the budget to be able to do this, and it sustains itself over a time period as well, so that it doesn't come back to haunt us well into our future. We're seeing already communities, Mesquite being one, that has already begun to, in the North Dallas area, or excuse me, McKinney being one in the North Dallas area, that has already gone to increase their teacher pay. This level is designed to get us to be competitive around the state, not just the region. We're competitive around the region, but it's to help draw what it looks like to be competitive in large urban areas, which would be Austin, Houston, Dallas, so that we can still stay in those ranks to bring what that looks like. You know, I know that people are having job loss, and those are things to consider and think about. But I don't think that that's something that we don't do on the benefit of individuals who are doing an extremely good job in regards to what that could look like to not only keep us competitive, but keep us on pace. Because if the thought as well is if we delay, we're going to have to make it up somewhere else down the line. And it could be either small chunks or could be in the future no chunk, because if we decide to stay with what may be happening with oil and gas in our future. So we want to capitalize right now, and that's why we decided to stay with I decided to stay with the 56.5.
And again, this is Brian again, and I appreciate that answer. I think a lot of what we see in the oil and gas business is those salaries have really escalated, where we had to stay on kind of a schedule for our teachers. And I think it's every bit as important that, like you said, right now we have the ability to do it in the budget, and the state's helping out, that it's the right time to keep our teachers moving in a professional fashion for their salaries to be adjusted to what is a normal modern salary. I'm assuming that we are keeping the insurance the same, that there will be no changes in benefits for insurance.
Correct. We're going to maintain for the employee that there's not an increase for the employee insurance. So that will help the employee as well. And then we're going to see some positives that come out of what this looks like as well for Mr. Kennedy and Mr. Murray and others, as we see rental properties decrease for living. As we purchased our own living opportunity, we're creating a great environment to allow individuals to move in here, not only retain more of their pay, not only get more pay, but retain more of it, but also take care of what those expenses are that typically in other areas you're going to have to address, whether it be the rent, the insurance, no pay or little increase in pay. But as I talk to my colleagues around the country and around the state, everybody's wrestling with that. But we many are going ahead and moving forward with raises for their staff, knowing that this could be, if we look at it, could be, if we think about the final moment, let's get to it. And if we can seize it, let's seize it. And then let's see what the future may hold for us to see, do they come at smaller portions, every other year portion, or are we able to maintain what the course is? The goal that I've always set walking in is I want to get teacher pay to $60,000 and get hourly pay to $15 an hour. And so it's a slow progression to get to that, and we're team is doing really well to make that happen. And
as far as the minimum pay, we're at 10 this year, and so this is a $2 per hour raise plus 3%, or is that 3% part of the $2?
So one of the things that they'll look at, and it's going to vary for some individuals, that $2 an hour could be a sizable increase that's greater than the 3%. So the team will look at from start moving people to $12 an hour. And Woodrow, you correct me if I'm wrong anywhere in here. Moving people to $12 an hour to see what increase that is, and do you need the 3% to help move you to that threshold? For those who are built within, is it just the 3% that you need in order to move you forward? So that's going to HR will work through what that looks like for all employees. We have a way of determining all that per person. Woodrow, did I miss anything, or do you need to add anything?
No, sir, just exactly what you had mentioned in regard to 3%. There are some, once we move the salary schedule from a $10 minimum to a $12 minimum, that's a 20% increase. So it really does affect the entire pay plan. So we have had to address all of those, and there are some incoming that possibly there are newcomers into the school district or years of experience where they will either have the adjustment or the 3% pay increase, whichever one brings them into internal equity. So yes, exactly what you said.
Would you remind us the specifics, unless it's on the next slide, on item G, the student technology initiative? As I understand it, if I recall correctly, the Chromebooks. Could you dive into that one a little deeper?
Yes, sir. So one of the things that we want to do is we want to go into the next school year and providing a device for every student. So K2, that device would be a touch screen, more of an iPad that we would utilize for students who are learning to read. In grades 3 through 12, that device would be a Chromebook, which provides them the laptop capability and the processing capability for documents and information, and pushing along with what we're doing currently in our virtual classroom. We would not issue those out until that January timeframe, so after the Christmas break timeframe. We were looking at purchasing those early, but we are doing a number of upgrades that we were afforded in a partnership with the city as well as the county to increase and boost what our Wi-Fi broadband capabilities are. So we're moving to a Wi-Fi 6 capacity across the district. Laptops currently right now are not able to push to a Wi-Fi 6. So we wanted to be sure that after the July timeframe, they have not created these laptops. They're not in production. So we know that talking with our provider that those would be in production after July is when we would buy those that could meet the capacity of what we're building logistically. And then we would go into our distribution for what we need to do for students. So we're trying to navigate what we're doing currently right now with old laptops, when new laptops come, as well as the teacher laptop opportunity. We have not afforded our teachers a device upon entry. And many organizations, that's one of the things that you do get is a laptop device when you enter into an organization. We're more of a bring your own device district, which is, for me, not acceptable for someone who's coming to work. We want to provide what the capable device is for you to utilize and do currently what we're doing right now, the Google Classroom, on our device at home, as opposed to your personal computer or trying to figure out how to move the next steps. I don't know if that's enough for you, Mr. Davis, or if you need more, we can certainly get that to you.
Your latter comments addressed item G, the teacher technology. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay.
H, yes.
I'm sorry, H, yes, H. Okay. No, that's all. Thank you.
And so we'll go to capital improvement so you can see if there's anything that you recognize that we want to offer. I apologize for not leaving space after G so that you could identify that. Mr. Marcus?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Can you go back to the previous slide?
Yes, sir.
So the student technology initiative, is that are we going to be able to provide like a map showing, the broad range of that system, so people are aware that how far it reaches out, who can connect to it, or is it actually a citywide and countywide system?
So that particular technology initiative, Mr. Marquez, is strictly a device. So it'd be specifically a laptop or a handheld tablet for students. One of the things that we're in conversation with right now that we'll be at some point in time bringing to the board is to think about the devices that we purchase or the devices that we get, which provide the the Wi-Fi, which I think you're speaking to. The Wi-Fi that we're doing with the city is pushing it into buildings. So it's going to be only building related. And so I think what you're speaking to is how far out can we push Wi-Fi to support students that can go potentially 360 into the county. So we have worked on what are MiFi, our hotspot devices for students. We got to think, I think, a little broader in regards to what we can do to provide service into our community that exceed just the hotspot, because that's a monthly fee, time and time over and over again. And could we actually have our own cell phone towers that push Wi-Fi out, or Wi-Fi towers that push Wi-Fi out like you're asking, that pushes it way out for individuals who have our devices to connect into. There are some districts very small that have purchased and provided their tower for Wi-Fi for their community. And so it's a conversation that we're going to get started. And actually tomorrow, Mr. Hawley, our executive director of technology, he and I will be in a conversation to discuss what other cities are contemplating and other school systems. Indiana Public Schools is in this conversation. Phoenix Union out of Arizona, they're in that same conversation about utilizing the device, which is a charge of $47 a month, up to $47 a month for data, times the number of devices. Could you actually get a tower that would give you the longevity of what that could look like, as opposed to doing it in small pieces? Because you can't get everybody, trying to find 27,000 devices is going to be a challenge. So could you do it with a tower? And so that's going to be the piece that we'll address, that I believe is leading to the question that you have. Right.
Well, and most people, and not everyone, has a cable, and is there any current technology that allows you to hook up to that system without going full blown, streaming services and so forth?
There are
just to connect back to the system, to our system.
We provided to our families on our COVID website, members in our community, vendors in our community who provide that service for them to reach out to. It becomes a challenge for some families. So for some families it works. It offers up to $5 to $10 a month. I forget which, no more than 10, no less than 5, that provides you internet resources at a reasonable cost, whether it be Verizon, AT&T, Grande, such and such, and on. There might be about 6 vendors that we list. But the challenge is that if you have any flaw along the way where you were late on a payment, or you missed a payment, or something may have occurred, you can't access what that provides for you as a family. So not the fault of the student who's not working and taking care of those bills. The student get penalized for that action, which in this case, yes. So we've got to work around what that looks like. So there's conversations out with the FCC about what does it mean to provide those resources to all families, so that we can ensure that everybody has access. If I can get you the tool, which is the tablet or the laptop, the next tool is, do you have Wi-Fi access? And that's a challenge for some families, not only the tool, but the Wi-Fi. So we want to make sure we address that equity piece. The tower could help with that, but it could be a beneficial factor for everybody. So conversation I would want to drive into is with the city and the county, what do we think about doing this together to create this Wi-Fi access for our entire community? So that that's something that we could drive and be a community that's networked.
Yeah, so I've had the experience of putting up a telecommunication system up in North Dakota and Montana.
Yes, sir.
One of the things you can do is
they're a little raspy. They're a little raspy, Mr. Marquez. I don't know if it's your microphone.
I'll slow down a little bit. Can you hear me better there?
It's still a little raspy, but go ahead.
One of the things that I've had experience with, can you hear me better there?
It sounds about the same.
Okay. So one of the things I've had experience with is putting up a telecommunication system. And what happens is that sometimes you can go and partner with other tower people that have towers up, and just rent space on them. And so it'd be great if we could come up with a partnership with a college, other entities that are in the educational space, and provide maybe some bandwidth across for everybody, so students could tie into.
I agree with Marquez, but I think there's a misunderstanding or not a full understanding of the collaboration between the city and the county. And I only can speak to it with Mr. Riddick because I was at the library when that process started. But using the city and the county infrastructure and then tying into the district to bump that to the Wi-Fi 6 is going to accomplish, I think, what you're getting at, Mr. Marquez. They just haven't gotten to the point where they've gotten that infrastructure completed. Is that accurate, Mr. Riddick?
That is, and part of it is how far can we push it out in regards to getting all the way out to the north, east, south, and west sectors of the county.
Okay.
But the Wi-Fi 6 is going to give us more broadband and more power and ability to draw in more, which is going to push our Google Classroom opportunity. So we're going to see a really significant lift that way. Now it's about how widespread do we have it. And so we've developed a heat map, in essence, Mr. Marquez, what you were speaking to. Where do we know that there are deficits around Wi-Fi, and where does that exist? So how do we set up our buildings to supply what that that extra boosting could be, as well as how we identified our buses, how to take our buses with Wi-Fi into community areas.
Can I'm going to move over to L.
Yes, sir.
Expenses. Would there be any reason that we end up incurring more expenses? Would there be any strategy or in starting the school later? Time frame wise, or as a TA, as a commissioner said anything versus time frame to starting a normal time frame or pushing it out?
Yes, sir. So he's addressing what we'll bring to the board in a conversation during our next board meeting, what is known as an intersessional calendar. Year round was a previous nomenclature for the calendar. It provides what an earlier start, which puts us into July, which we've thought about for the last couple of years. What does that mean? But the last week of July, it starts with the calendar start. Then it has a 9-week calendar schedule with 2 weeks off every 9 weeks. And then you include in that spring break gets 2 weeks. Thanksgiving gets 2 weeks. Christmas has 2 weeks. And then you have these other days that are built into it that goes, that then leads you to like a 6-week summer. And then you rotate it into the schedule again. That's the calendar that he's proposing, only knowing that when you see letter L, we've got to think about reentry and what does reentry look like for us as we start. Our calendar shows an August start, or if the board agrees, we might have to move that and have an earlier start, knowing that we could have what I call micro closures. These micro closures are when someone, as an example, at Bush Elementary, either staff, student, or someone at home of a staff or student becomes ill, that we might have to close that building down and give it a 2-week window before it can reopen. So if you have these intersessional calendars and you have this 2-week closure, you can make that 2-week time up within your calendar time without trying to extend the year further and further and further into the summer. So that's one strategy that he's brought forward, and he's spoken on it on 2 different occasions that I've been a part of to talk through this intersessional calendar. It's a calendar that we shared with the board back in April. It could have been April or March that we shared when we were approving our traditional calendar. We had the side-by-side, which was the 180-day calendar, because if you want the funding that the state would give you in addition, you could have, you can increase the number of days that you are in school. So with that, that's a Socorro ISD has been on this intersessional calendar for more than a decade. So that's the one that he has brought forward to share that. That's something that districts really need to consider as we start thinking through these micro closures. An example would be, like I shared, staff and student at Bush, the student goes home, but there's another student who attends another school that we've got to look at, and that school might have to close because of the connection. So you could have this ebb and flow around schools happening all the time. So how can your calendar help be adaptive to recognize the learning that has to occur that's being missed? So your calendar has to be innovative in regards to that. So we're going to bring some information to the board to share back why we're thinking down this pathway and what we might consider.
Mr. Riddick.
Yes, sir.
How will that impact virtual learning?
Right. So we would still, what I'm proposing and thinking through, and Dr. Atkins is developing a team, or has developed a team to help us think about what reentry could look like in August, is that we would have kids that need us every day. So if it's K2 or K3, because I'm teaching you how to read, and parents are finding how difficult that is to do right now in a virtual platform. Some are very successful, some not as. So can we have those kids in a building? So I need those kids. There are parents who are going to need us because, as a reality, in order to work, their kids have to be in a location. They get the 2-4, which is they're there academically, and we're there to provide the care. So then we have students currently right now in our Google platform who are doing well, who we might need to touch base with periodically. So that could be like a college schedule, twice a week, 3 times a week. Then we have students who are thriving in an incredible way in the Google Classroom. And those students can continue to stay, or should continue to stay, in that Google Classroom. And we see them periodically. It might be monthly, quarterly, depending on how well they're thriving. And I think kids will ebb and flow through these pieces, through these moving parts of what that model could look like. Reentry is going to have individuals who are 65 and older, who should be in a building in a time frame if the pandemic is still an active piece that we have to think about, and who should be in the Google Classroom delivering it. So I think Google Classroom is going to be a part of our framework as we drive forward, and all these moving parts that we're talking about are going to be a part of it. The other thing is, can you put 22 kids in a classroom? I don't think that's what parents are going to want when we enter. There are going to be immune issues with kids. There are going to be immune issues with staff. It's going to be super dynamic, all the things and challenges that we're going to have. And I'm proud of the team that we're assembling to go after it. But it's going to speak to all the things that we're doing right now that at some point in time, we're going to have to think about how we launch that in August.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I have a question relative to B. How do we compare?
I'm sorry, sir, was that Bravo or Delta?
Bravo.
Yes, sir.
I still got a question on Ellen.
What?
If you don't mind.
How do we compare with comparable districts as it relates to support staff salaries, hourly wages?
So
I'll leave that to Mr. Bailey.
Yes, Mr. Fuller, thank you for the question. As TASB, of course, does an annual salary survey that basically compares our school districts with all districts across the state of Texas. Our real comparison data that really matters for our school district is really the local area. And of course, we are well below, and that's why we've had those significant increases that the board has approved last year, of course, going from 10 to 12, and then, from 8 to 10, and then this year proposing 10 to 12, is that for support staff, it really is based upon the local area. And our district employees, our support staff, is significantly lower than other businesses, organizations around in this area. We're not going to get a lot of support staff that would transition from other districts around the state to come and work in a support staff role. So therefore, our immediate local area is really where we focus on when we start trying to look at competitive and market data.
Thank you.
Mr. Marquez, you wanted to go back to letter L?
Yes, sir. So is there any thought process or thinking as far as the commission is concerned on the actually having a later reentry in case there's a vaccine that's developed? Is there anything to push this school year into starting in mid-September and ending it later for this year, because to give time frame for, you know, if there were to be a vaccine? And then the other question to this also is there any discussion that the school systems would be used to vaccine kids if there is a vaccine that comes out?
Okay, I'll address one. I could share how we do vaccinations on number 2. So number 1, no, he has not put information out in regards to addressing pushing it further back and waiting on a vaccination or a vaccine. Through data and information, we know that there are clinical trials that are ongoing right now. We know that vaccines will come out sooner. Don't know how soon. People are speaking into the 21 school, our school year, that could potentially happen. So he's not spoke about how do we delay, because we don't know how long the delay could be. We're speaking to how do we move up and then meet up with what could be a delay. On the vaccination piece, we don't do vaccinations in schools. So if one were to come forward, it would be much like the flu shot. We would set up what could be flu clinics with our provider, who could set up what are opportunities for our employees and the employees' families to be vaccinated, as well as within our community. That's typically how we handle any type of virus that comes through that we've been able to deal with. And this could be very different on how vaccinations come forward. But right now, our nurses, they do not conduct vaccinations at schools.
And I only heard your second part of that response. I hung up accidentally.
Yep. So right now, vaccinations don't happen in schools, and the calendar.
Yep.
The commissioner is not addressing a later calendar date, knowing that we could have closures along that time. So he's addressing an earlier date, and then so that we can deal with closures as they happen.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. On L as well, one of the things that we have to think about on expenses are, we talked about the protective gear. Does every student have to come in with a mask? Is it a hospital surgical mask that you can wear for so many days, or is it a cloth mask that you can keep and clean and reuse over and over a lot longer? So right now, a 6-layered mask is about $4. So we got to think about, you know, does every student have to have one, or does that part of your school supplies that you have to come with the protective mask, and you've got to get that? And so we're trying to ramp up what all this could look like as we think about reentry. We're following Denmark, the Netherlands, Israel, Germany, a number of South Korea, Singapore, a number of other countries that have gone back to school to see what that has looked like for their reentry. The McKinsey Group organization that has presented to us has shared what that looks like as far as data to help us in our planning and in our strategy. And that's what this budget is helping to address, not just on the COVID side, but on the professional staff side, that we're going to have to think about how do we deliver this model in a very, very different way that's been about for 100 years. If we can go to the next slide, Tony. So these are the capital improvement projects that we went to briefly, and we're back to think about what we want to address. Mr. Trischetti, you see on letter A, the RO systems at all secondary campuses, what that would mean to do the piping and the plumbing and set up fountains that exist there. It would not be the number of fountains that every campus has. That would take that cost significantly higher. This is address what could be fountains in the main areas, the gym, the cafeteria. What are those areas that we could put fountains in? Some of these things are items that were addressed during the bond. So you'll see the athletic pieces that we could tackle during this time. What you see, the turf fields for baseball, softball, football, lighting that you'll see, 4-lane tracks, intercom system. All our secondary schools are on an analog system. The intercom systems are very dated. We asked that we could replace the most oldest and dilapidated system, which is Midland High. So we have that budgeted, and I appreciate the board's opportunity to go ahead and tackle that one. This is to take care of all of our other secondary schools. Did leave an H and an I and so on, so that if the board has others that we want to consider and think through, when we come to our next budget meeting, we would tier everything based on what we're hearing from board members and say, okay, here's how we're going to attack first, and then work our way down.
Mr. Reddick?
Yes, sir.
On B and C, Andy, district's done a great job at, at this. And I just asked that if we could, put out more communication that there's a savings for the district on water, because I know I got some questions over that stuff.
Yes, sir.
And I try to explain to people that, there's dollars that are spent for water, and that the district has to spend for to maintain our facilities, and this is a long-term savings for the district. But I just thought I'd make that comment real quick.
Thank you.
Mr. Reddick, I want to ask a couple of things about these turf football fields. We've done those at the middle schools. Are these at the freshman schools, or where?
Correct.
Those? Okay.
Correct. Yes, sir. It would be at the 2 freshman campuses. It would put the lighting across the board at our secondary campuses. It would put 4-lane tracks everywhere but at SJ is what this would address. And then would go into address now baseball and softball. We spoke with those coaches around their natural turf, synthetic turf, what options they see, infield, outfield. We found that those are heavily sodded areas that we have to not only provide the sod, the water, the fertilizer, the mowing, the edging, the upkeep that comes along with taking care of all that. That long-term synthetic turf would be the greatest benefit that we're seeing, not only at the professional leagues, we see it at the college, see it in a number of high schools. This is a path that they wanted to go down, and we wanted to tackle. And it's also about equity, because there are booster programs that are able to support certain programs in certain fields in a really good way. And we've taken over some of that, what that looks like, because it was our responsibility to do some of those things, but they're adding a very significant lift. Where there are other programs where they're not as strong as a booster club, but they deserve the same type of field option. So we felt this would address that equity across the board, and boosters could then put their money into other things that they want to do for their team, for their players.
Yeah, as a former booster club member, especially for baseball, I know the hardships they go through, and I think that's great to be able to help them out so that they can focus their funds elsewhere. I know a couple of years ago we had issues with softball fields too.
Correct.
We didn't have the funds to actually maintain them properly, and so and there was an equity between baseball and softball, because baseball actually had the funds to do it, but softball didn't. So I'm glad we're addressing that in both issues. Are the tracks are just at the middle schools and freshman schools?
And they would be there at the 9th grade center and the freshman schools. Yes.
Okay. And then 2 things that I thought of that we might consider, and I don't know the need, but you addressed one security item for sure in G with the intercom upgrades.
Yes, sir.
But have we given any thought about other security measures that we could incorporate into the secondary schools at the bond?
We did some things this past year at our secondary campuses. You'll see that at many of them, except the high schools, which are a little bit more difficult, where we put delayed entry that you had to be videoed and then buzzed into the doors like we have at our elementary campuses, very similar. We're looking at access points. What could that look like for campuses that have no key entry, but it's an access card entry. We're looking at security cameras, increasing what security camera footage could look like. Thank God we had the footage and the camera to help in one scenario most recently. But what could it look like to add more cameras to the perimeter of campuses as well as the interior? So those are the immediate ones that I would share that we could take on. The vestibules were going to be the bigger pieces that we were going to get out of the bond, the safety and security. So then when you walked in, like in many of our elementaries, you walk into a vestibule that still locks you and contains you before you can go into the next area, whether it be the office or into the hallways. Some of our elementaries are so old that they don't have a vestibule. So we try to create locking mechanisms that keep you contained in an area as you proceed to the office, because the office is, let's say, in the middle of the building and not at the front of the building. So those are items that we that are not on here because those are significantly higher around construction for what that would look like.
Mr. Riddick, could I just add a little bit to that? I know one of the issues is at our secondary high schools, and yes, we can create vestibules with a fairly significant dollars at our high schools. However, we're so open, especially at Midland High School and at Lee Freshman and other schools. We're so open that to create a perimeter enclosure, then we're getting into multi-million-dollar projects.
So those are the ones right now that I would jump on, Mr. Murray. We could add cameras. I know that just in a conversation yesterday with our individual who takes care of our networking and our camera access, that was a conversation that we had. We have last year implemented could be about 200 cameras that we were increasing. He has that same an increase again for this year. It's in his budget. We could, raise what that amount looks like. We've done well on personnel, security personnel, but I think those are the access doors and the cameras are some of the bigger ones that we could certainly think about.
Okay, thank you for that. And the last one, we don't address anything fine arts in this list. And so is there anything that we know of that there's a need in the fine arts programs, band, choir, orchestra, or other programs like robotics or debate that we need to be addressing? I know our robotics program in MISD has been a shining star in making sure that we've provided the right resources there as well.
I will certainly reach. We've done a tremendous job for those who are either watching or viewing or hearing on the fine arts side. We purchased band uniforms, which were, and thanks for the board for allowing and taking that recommendation and approving it for both campuses, about $150,000 in band uniforms. So we've given both athletics and fine arts a huge lift, but I'll reach back to fine arts to see what are some other things that they see that are a big need. We've increased their budget so they can not only work with repairs and access, travel. We've done a number of things to support what that looks like, but I will circle back to see, is there something else that they think about that they would want to go after. I know that they've got a huge lift from the FMH Foundation, the Marie Hall Foundation, that has supported our fine arts in an incredible way through philanthropic dollars to lift lighting and sound and curtains. But I will certainly reach out to Ms. Deb Shaw, our Director of Fine Arts, to see is there something else that sits in there that we can accomplish. Okay,
great, thank you. And I appreciate you mentioning that about the FMLA because I wasn't aware that they were helping us out, but that's awesome.
Yes, they're an amazing organization that has stepped up in a tremendous way with hundreds of thousands of dollars to support our fine arts. Just taking some notes here.
A couple of questions. One is I want to confirm that these items A through G are in next year's budget. This is just an expansion of what the prior slide showed for capital improvements, correct?
Yeah, yes, sir. That is correct.
Okay. And then secondly, for presentation purposes, at least my opinion, I realize that because they're already in the budget, it really, in one sense, makes no difference in what order they're listed. A through G, but I would suggest for presentation purposes, moving G up to either A or B and everything else, being reordered after that.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. We'll prioritize in the next budget workshop. And as Mr. Riddick said, we'll put them in tiers as we think that it needs to be, and we can go from there.
I was thinking that the tier, maybe I misunderstood. I thought the tiers that we would work on would be for items that aren't already in the budget, but if we can afford to put them in next year, we will do so.
Yes, if you take this on and the board is in agreement that this is what we want to tackle, certainly G will become one of the main priorities that we talk about, because it's one of mine for reentry. We can't do anything else until we come into a building. So we could have turf fields, but if no one's on them, that's something we have to really think about. So I think the G, and knowing where we are with safety, where that matters, how we categorize these are not in a specific order. A doesn't mean that comes before G or anything else. It's just a list is what this is, but we'll prioritize this list to share that those are the first things that we will go after and tackle. The intercom system will be first.
But these are already in the budget proposed, right?
Correct.
Okay. I just
correct.
Aren't okay. Well, then I'm still a little confused, because my recollection, maybe it's faulty, is that I didn't appreciate that in the past, if something was in the budget at the start of the year that we approved for that year, that there was a tier system for that. I thought that was just in the budget. I thought that we had a second list of board and superintendent priorities that if we could afford to do so as the year went on, we would prioritize them in a tier fashion. Am I all wrong about that?
No, sir, you're right. Previously, we created tiers because we presented a list of items, and through our conversations, the tier 1 items were the ones that made it into the budget. Tier 2 did not. An example would be Mr. Murray several years ago brought up a teacher in attendance incentive that we should be able to come up with. We just couldn't work that into the budget. So that became a tier 3 item. We wanted, I believe, 20 buses, but we only did 10. So we moved 10 buses to a tier 2 item because they did not make the budget. But if we found that those are things that we could tackle at another point in time, we would certainly go after those other items. We just could never get to some. So yes, you're absolutely right. We built it that way. In essence, all these things currently right now are built into the budget, so they're making it. We don't have yet any tier 2 items or tier 3 items unless the board says, hey, let's hold off on this one and let's wait. Unless any of these things that we're discussing right now were to become part of that conversation, then it would move out of a tier 1, which is it's in the budget, and it would go to tier 2, which is it's out of the budget. And it would be let's see.
I guess as an example, once the comprehensive facility review is completed, then that the items on that list might be either the subject of an additional tiering hierarchy, or they possibly could replace some of these.
Correct.
Okay.
If that's what the board chose. Correct.
But for now, I guess what you're saying is that these are all tier 1 and they're in the budget.
Correct.
Subject to any further comments or discussion or further information from the facility study as an example.
Correct. Exactly. So unless, I don't want to take any presumption from the board, but these are things that we've come up with. I want certainly the feedback to say, are we good? And the budget continues to drive forward with these built in, unless the board shared that they wanted to move things out of the tier 1 and make it a tier 2, or it's even further delayed into a tier 3 model. But the tiering, that's the strategy of the tiering.
Okay. All right. Even though they're not, I think you'll already agree to do this unless the board disagrees, I'd like to see, even though these are all tier one items, so to speak, now with that explanation, that still want to move G to either A or B for future presentations on the budget, please.
Yes, sir. We'll take care of that.
All right, thanks.
You're welcome. I believe that is going to be our last slide, and Mr. Dodds, correct me if I'm wrong.
No, you're correct. So we knew that these two slides would take up some time, and hopefully the board has had some time to look at this, and as we move forward through the rest of this budget procedure, as Mr. Riddick said, if there's something that needs to be put in or taken out, let us know.
And so we'll have could be a minor update come our budget, our board meeting. Mr. Dodds and I will review the meeting today and then share at our board meeting during the financial update any revisions that we have here. And then we'll have our next budget meeting. If you go back to the budget calendar, Tony, to the very beginning. Our next budget workshop is going to come in June, and we'll work again with the board to propose a budget workshop before the June 22nd, hearing on the proposed tax rate. So we'll have another workshop for us to go through so that we can address any final things as we roll in to the 22nd. So it'll be early June when we look for that meeting.
Our next board meeting Monday or Tuesday?
I'm sorry, Mr. Kennedy. Maybe it was just me, but I could barely hear you.
Okay. Sorry. Usually I talk too loud. Is our next full board meeting Monday or Tuesday of next week?
Our next board meeting that we're having is going to be, let me make sure, unless anyone can shout it out to me. I've got the 20th. Oh, wait, that's April. Hold on one second. I should have the 18th.
The 18th is what I...
It's going to be a Monday.
It's Monday the 18th. Monday the 18th.
All right. With that, we're going to go ahead and turn it back over to you, Mr. Davis. That's our budget workshop presentation.
All right. Unless there are any other questions from the board members, then we'll adjourn. So let me pause and see if there are any other questions.
Rick, I just have one question for Mr. Dodds and the superintendent. Relative to the COVID expenses category and technology for students and teachers, will there be an overlap in terms of whether or not teachers and students can get equipment, technological equipment stemming from this COVID pandemic? Can we justify purchasing that equipment in that regard?
I see what you're saying. So we could have it as an expense that either the CARES Act or state or federal monies are able to support us. So they've addressed that, and I believe that's not one that would be picked up as an expense going into the virtual classroom and moving in that direction. Mr. Dodds, you can do some more research to see, does going into a virtual classroom qualify as an expense? Because that's happening across the state, moving us from the building into a home and the devices that we're purchasing. So one of the things that we will be able to get support on potentially could be the Wi-Fi hotspot device. So what we're doing currently right now is anything that we're doing COVID related, whether it be adding more laptops into our fold if we had to, which that hasn't happened at a considerable rate, adding more hotspots, which that has happened at a considerable rate, designating those as a COVID-19. So as Mr. Dodds learns more and more about the CARES Act and what is coming and getting funneled into Texas and how we can then move forward, we could be able to address that. We're working with, we have a FEMA account, I believe at this point in time, through our risk manager has set us up with one. So we'll see what dollars we're able to get reimbursed based on what FEMA has put forward and then what has come through down as a CARES Act as well.
Thank you.
Yet to be determined, sir.
Thank you.
We just know that they said have plenty of documentation, so we are sharing that we are keeping all of our documentation to reference that.
Yes, sir.
One more question.
Okay.
Yes. Mr. Reddick, how's the in the year process coming along as far as the school year coming to an end? And I know y'all been doing some testing because I've been hushed a couple of times in my own house over testing kids. So
right. We moved GT testing to online, which is a first, which has been dynamic to see us still produce student assessments for GT online. We've done similar for pre-K to move pre-K online. We're building out what could be a virtual class, our school experience for kinder and pre-K students. So our kinder roundup typically would be at a school. Now we're going to set up a virtual opportunity for the school to have a virtual video that allows students and parents to meet the teacher and see the school. I would tell you that the end of school, where we are a week and 2 days away from getting to that point, the 22nd being that, our parents have done a tremendous job. I thank them immensely for what they've done to support their student in their learning, even the slightest of little bit or to the extreme that parents have done in regards to digging and seeing and experiencing whatever that learning threshold has looked like. We're getting our teachers into our buildings right now to, in essence, collect their things. The governor has given us that opportunity. Our staff is currently cleaning as that is occurring and happening, repairing and fixing as well as we can get caught up on a number of work orders that have been generated. So the team has done well on attacking what that looks like. Teachers will exit out. Dr. Atkins and her team have built up what is our summer learning plan. And so Jill Rivera has done a tremendous job with her teaching and learning team to support what a structure could look like around a student who needs gaps shored up because they had gaps before we went out because of COVID. They continue to have those gaps. We want that student in the summer learning environment in a very big way. Let's say that's maybe 3 hours a day. We want a student to have and continue their enrichment. So we have a platform to continue what enrichment could look like in all subject areas that a student has an interest in, that they can dive deeper in. And let's say a parent wants a student to expose what that could look like 2 hours a day. Then we have what we're building as summer camps. And these are camp counselors, our teachers who have dynamic interest in a number of things, whether it's digging for rocks or painting, using a musical instrument, or exploring the Constitution. Teachers will apply to become a camp counselor, and we will do a virtual camp for students based on the students' interests that they have, that they see that they want to go and learn from these teachers. And let's say that's an hour a day for a week or 2 week time period. So that's what we're going to be launching into. So that's school closure. That takes us into the summer. And you heard me speak to reentry, which is going to be the most dynamic thing I believe our country will ever do.
I know the governor closed, and maybe I missed the update, but the governor closed the schools all the way to the normal school year. So
correct. He closed school buildings.
Summer school?
He closed school buildings to the 22nd.
Okay, yeah. So with summer school, I wouldn't know a typical number for a room, but let's say there was 5 kids in a summer school class. Could you still have that class if there's enough spacing in there to actually have the physical class?
If given the opportunity to walk into a building, we haven't addressed that, and I'm sure we'll get more information as we get closer to the 22nd for what it looks like to occupy our school buildings. Yes, the same threshold would be, 6 feet circumference for a student. You would think about what are protective sneeze shields, what are face mask or bandana of some type that a student would have to wear in regards to being in a classroom. The health, checking the daily health of a student. So every day the student walks into the building, the student needs to complete a survey, both he and from parent, to say that the student is in good health. There's a nurse who then is there to take your temperature to make sure what you said on the form is accurate in regards to your self-assessment, and then come into the door to now get your temperature. And if it's 100 degrees or below, you're good to come in, is what I've been seeing. So I think there's still a number of logistics and anomalies to pushing learning into the building, but we'll see what comes from it. I think we've been working in a successful environment. It's not optimal for what that could look like. I believe that there are kids who are thriving in the home environment, but we'll see what we learn more around accessing into a building for learning.
And I appreciate that, Mr. Riddick. I know it's a logistical nightmare in a sense, but whether it's June or early July or August, I mean, eventually it's going to come to be, right?
At some point in time, I think all our parents and teachers are waiting for the time that we could all come together back into our structures. I think there's also parents who are ready to fly and navigate on the platform we have right now. So it's going to be a hybrid of a scenario that kids will have as an experience moving forward. And I think we're all ready for what that entails.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
All right. If there are any questions, we need to limit our questions to the budget because that's what the agenda item is. Are there any further questions about the budget before we adjourn? All right. Hearing none, we are adjourned at 6:07 p.m. Thanks, everybody.